what you saw today and how the proceeding went.
Steve, the former president was in the courtroom today. He appeared to be calm, but a little unhappy. He was expecting that the judge would allow him to make his own closing remarks today, but the judge originally rejected that. The judge did reconsider today in the courtroom, and he allowed Trump 5 minutes to speak. Trump reiterated many of the comments that he has made throughout this trial, that it is politically motivated and that it is election interference. The judge cautioned him to limit his remarks to only the laws and the facts in the case, to which Trump responded that there was no way he could do that because he said the case itself was outside the law and the facts. He said that Letitia James should pay him for what she has put him through. Let's take a look at some additional comments he made outside of the courtroom.
We have a company that's very liquid, very strong, great assets, and she sued me because she wanted the publicity to run for office, but they find nothing wrong. I think if anybody was being fair about it, and I'm not sure you can even hear me because they don't allow microphones over here, which is a little ridiculous, but if anybody's fair about it, you see, this is a case that should have never been brought, and I think we should be entitled to damages.
The proceeding today was essentially a recap of the arguments that were made throughout the trial. The prosecution saying that Trump falsified financial statements, and the defense saying that there was no fraud and there is no case. The defense did ask for a dismissal at the end of their closing arguments, but given that the judge himself has ruled that Trump was fraudulent and he has denied previous requests for dismissals, it's unlikely that he will now dismiss the case. Back to you.
NTD's Arlene Richards reporting live from Manhattan. Arlene, thank you. And with a 10 percentage points back, it notes as well further in that 41% of the world's population is having major elections. Sorry, 41%, not 70. And they say, yay, democracy, right? And they say, not really. What with extremist populist parties, mostly right-wing, on the rise everywhere from European Union to the Pacific. Let me just dig into this a bit, all right? They're saying that the elections happening, and again, 41% of the world right now, are themselves a threat to democracy. Now, how an election, given the democratic, but what is this big, and then talking directly about, well, the threat is a similar situation to 2016. As they note, it is almost a mirror image of 2016. What does that mean? That was, of course, the year that Donald J. was elected president of the United States. And they note that talking the potential reality that Trump could be reelected. Again, chances are close to 40%, as they're noting. And they note as well that the big problem the world is facing with this global threat to democracy and the possible end to democracy itself is not an actual end to democracy, but instead that the election process may elect people who are what they say extremist populist parties, mostly right-wing. In other words, they're saying it's a threat to global democracy because conservatives may actually win some places this year. That's what they're saying. Further in, they say, as for Europe, John and Adrian warn that in a terrifying number of cases, candidates who would have been seen as extremist wild cards in 2016 look the strongest, with likely advances in the European Parliament, Austria, Portugal, and Germany. And what do they mean by this? These extremist wild cards, who would have seen them as such? Well, mostly just the big corporate press and, of course, the left wing, which frames the right wing as extremist. And, you know, being fair, the right wing framing the left wing is pretty extreme also. Depends which side you're on. Now, look, imagine that. Allowing people to vote in an election is a threat to democracy. Briefly, I would agree with them on one point, which is that they say the elections in Taiwan do represent a threat to democracy. I would agree with that. You know, I'm actually in Taiwan reporting live right now. I'll be here till next Tuesday. Look, if one party wants to fold to the Chinese Communist Party, acknowledging or saying that they're not even a country, essentially, that's one of the big arguments in Taiwan, interestingly, with their political debates right now. One party has been talking about, you know, independence, that Taiwan is a sovereign nation, and the Chinese Communist Party has taken some issue with that because the CCP regards Taiwan as being part of China. And the other party, the KMT, the Kuomintang, is saying that the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, saying that Taiwan is a country, is provoking China, and this is leading the country towards the possibility of war. If your political position is arguing that you can't even call yourself a country, I'd say that does possibly represent the end of democracy, especially if it means a gradual moving towards being under the CCP, which is a communist country. So, in a real sense, I would agree on that. That in Taiwan, you might actually see a real end to democracy, but that's not an extremist right-wing position. That's a communist position. And if people vote to end their country, that is an end to democracy, at least for Taiwan. But the issue, in my opinion, taken this broader context of what this news piece is actually talking about, and notably what a lot of other media are saying right now, not just about Taiwan, but about the United States, Europe, and a lot of other countries on Earth. The big issue, in my opinion, is that this Bloomberg piece, and interestingly, again, many others being published by other outlets almost just like this very recently, are grouping all of these political leaders, into the same camp who just simply, in most cases, oppose far-left policies. And personally, I don't think they're actually talking about democracy when they're saying that these folks are a threat to democracy. I don't think by any means that Trump is a threat to democracy. I don't think that a lot of the other conservative politicians coming in are threats to democracy. In fact, in Europe, most of the right-wing, political leaders are still pretty dang far left. It's just that they maybe oppose, open borders and so on like that. But they're saying this is a threat to democracy. They're talking about the threat of actual democracy, right? They're talking about this to the current status quo of the political establishment. They're suggesting that if you oppose these, the trans agenda or the, very woke agenda sweeping the world right now, or you just believe a country should have functioning borders, then you're an extremist and a threat to democracy. And this is the unfortunate way this narrative is being spun. And look, it's not just Bloomberg's opinion writers saying this either. You could say, oh, it's just Bloomberg and one person's opinion. It's not just them. There's been a whole lot of articles almost within a very short time span saying almost the exact same thing. I'm just going to show you some of these. Look, The Atlantic claims that democracy may not even survive this time around. Democracy might die in darkness, as the Washington Post would suggest. But The Atlantic says this. They're saying lots of people will vote this year. That does not mean democracy will survive. And they say voting will take place in more than 60 countries this year, an unprecedented number containing roughly half of the global population. But even with all this, voting democracy is under severe threat, endangered by predatory politicians who rig elections and disgruntled voters willing to hand over power to autocratic leaders. Imagine, folks, a political party willing to rig elections. What would the world do if a political party were to rig an election? Have we seen such a thing before? Well, The Atlantic is saying maybe not, but it might just happen. And they're saying that the most pivotal elections will take place in November. Well, election in November being the U.S. election. And they're saying that's when the world's most powerful democracy, the United States, they're suggesting, decides whether to turn itself over to an avowedly authoritarian demagogue. They're, of course, referring to Donald J. Trump. Now, I don't personally know if Donald Trump is an avowedly authoritarian demagogue, but this is journalism according to The Atlantic. And look, imagine that. When have we ever seen the rigging of elections? And I would agree that if you rig an election, you're a threat to democracy. Maybe we've seen that before. I don't know. Maybe that the threats to democracy are already in existence. And, it depends on which side of the aisle you're on. And I'd say also, I'd agree that if you weaponize the justice system to go after your political opponents, you might just be an avowedly authoritarian demagogue. But again, this is a question of basic reality they're raising here. They're saying this is not a problem yet, but it could be. And so to prevent the threat to democracy, We need to eliminate the democratic process through which people can choose to vote for the person they want to by striking that person's name from the ballot itself. Only by not allowing people to engage in democracy can we save democracy.
Shenyun Creations, the streaming platform from Shenyun, featuring world-class dance, past programs, and all original music. Masterclasses, behind the scenes, comedy, and more. Explore shenyuncreations.com.
Now when they're mixing every drug on the market with fentanyl, and they're killing the people we love.
Musician Jason DeFord on Thursday urged lawmakers to pass the Friend of Fentanyl Act. The Senate already passed it last year, but the House did not. The act would declare international fentanyl trafficking a national emergency, require sanctions on transnational criminal organizations, take special measures against fentanyl-related money laundering, and more. Republican Senator Tim Scott at the hearing said we have to follow the money. According to the senator, it's important to pass the Fentanyl Act to impose sanctions on Chinese and Mexican organizations trafficking fentanyl and to use anti-money laundering measures against them.
We have to hit them where it hurts, and that's their wallets. The illicit money engine needs to be turned off, and it needs to be turned off now.
DeFord said the fentanyl crisis is a national emergency, which deserves much more attention than it is getting right now.
190 people a day overdose and die every single day in the United States of America. That is about a 737 plane. That's what about a 737 aircraft can carry. Could you imagine the national media attention it would get if they were reporting that a plane was crashing every single day and killing 190 people?
According to the CDC, there have been over 100,000 overdose deaths in the U.S. in 2022. That's 2% more than in 2021. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
Homeland Security Secretary made with the White House. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports from Capitol Hill.
Next Friday is the first of two deadlines to fund the government before a shutdown kicks in. Now Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is setting into motion a bill to temporarily extend government funding, but it's unclear for how long.
Unfortunately, it has become crystal clear that it will take more than a week to finish the appropriations process.
Passing another continuing resolution is a position that House Speaker Mike Johnson originally opposed, but now he's softening on this as Republicans in both chambers are insisting on having changes at the southern border funding the government. This week, those Republicans are doubling down on those fiscal and border demands.
Well, we're looking for the right legislation to move forward, not just any legislation. The people I represent, they want us to cut spending, secure the border. That's what we need to do.
He's part of a group of House Republicans who are expressing strong discontent with their new speaker's $1.7 trillion spending deal with Senate Leader Chuck Schumer. Johnson says that he doesn't have a choice here, and he secured the wins that he could, such as resilience of funding. Now we meet frustrated Republicans who are squashed reports that he's considering backing out of that deal with Schumer.
Let me tell you what's going on. We're having thoughtful conversations about funding options and priorities. I've made no commitments, so if you hear otherwise, it's just simply not true.
It's now become very clear that Johnson is hitting the same roadblocks as his predecessor did in trying to work out a deal on this controversial spending issue as he works with a razor-thin majority in the House, persistent House Republicans, and Democrats controlling the Senate and the White House. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
As House Republicans continue their demands for budget cuts and border security, House Speaker Mike Johnson indicating he's open to a short-term resolution. We spoke with Tennessee Congressman Andy Ogles, who says a short-term plan for the border could be a good start. Congressman Andy Ogles, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Congressman, what are some of the biggest challenges facing Congress right now as you guys try to hash out this budget bill? Two deadlines.
Across the nation, you have, whether it's a conservative area or more liberal area, blue mayors, everyone's crying for the border to be shut down, and you've got a Senate that's not cooperating. So there was a vote that was just had. I was one of those that shut down the House floor to make sure that we sent a message to the Speaker that any spending bill has to include securing our border. I mean, in Tennessee alone, so just Tennessee, they cost taxpayers between $850 million and $1 billion a year that we spend on illegal immigration. That's not sustainable because that's money that should be going to our kids, our first responders, and our veterans. You know, we have a suicide epidemic amongst our veterans. And so there's services that we should provide to our citizens, not illegals that are coming here. And look, anyone who crosses that border and they do so illegally, they're a criminal. And I would say anyone who's a criminal that's come into this nation should never, ever be allowed to become a citizen. I know that's a hard line to take. This is our country. We get to decide who comes here, and we get to decide who has to leave.
What sort of policies would you like to see with regard to the border in this bill?
Well, I mean, I think the simplest thing for, say, like the next 90 days, because you're going to have some sort of short-term vehicle, would be a 90-day CR with a 90-day stay in Mexico. And you're immediately going to see the effects at the southern border. Then maybe at that point, the light goes off with the Democrats to say, oh, this is a good thing that we've closed the border. This is a reprieve for the border towns. But I would also say every town in America, whether you're in South Dakota or Tennessee or anywhere else, is a border town because of fentanyl. And so we have a crisis in this country. We have an epidemic. When you look at the number of people that OD on fentanyl every single day, it's equivalent to a jetliner. So if a jetliner crashed today, planes would be grounded. Today, we're going to have overdoses to the same equivalent. And what is the government doing? They're allowing tens and tens of thousands of people to come here illegally. That's got to stop.
It appears as though the Speaker may be open to entertaining a continuing resolution. Is that something that you'd be willing to consider?
We could do a longer-term funding solution that includes border security. That would be the ideal scenario, but at this point, we've got to fund the government. But most importantly, we've got to shut down the border.
A lot of people, when they hear a government shutdown, they think that everything's just going to go black.
Right.
That's not necessarily the case.
No, I mean, 85% of the budget is on autopilot. And so let's be honest, if the government shut down, they're not wasting taxpayer money. I mean, we got almost $35 trillion in debt now. I would argue a government shutdown from a spending perspective is probably a good thing. But that being said, I get it. People don't want to shut down. They don't want the inconveniences that might come from it. But I think it's a scare tactic that is thrown out there to scare our seniors or veterans who think they may not get their benefits, but they will. They will get their benefits. And so anyone who says otherwise is being dishonest.
Now, I think the most interesting part of the interview here that most viewers are probably waiting to hear about is the issue of UAPs.
Yeah.
You're on the committee that's investigating this. There's been a classified briefing that's just been called. What should we make of this?
We know there's aircraft operating in our airspace that defy physics as we understand it. And so is that our technology? If it's not our technology, whose is it? And how do we know if it's ours, it's not going to fall into enemy hands? As Congress, as members of Congress, we need to know that. We need to put guardrails and safeguards in place to protect that technology so it doesn't fall into the hands of China or Russia or some other bad actor like North Korea.
Congressman Andy Ogles, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley continue to clash after last night's debate. Meanwhile, former President Trump is again showing his domination in the race by beating both of them in TV ratings in dueling events last night. Joining us now live from Iowa is White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. So what did we learn after last night's dueling events in Iowa?
And that being said, Trump is also suggesting that if he comes back into office, that he might just turn the tables on Biden. He's saying that he is your retribution. And there's a possibility, in terms of how it's being framed, that he could have Biden indicted, possibly, or at least have him investigated. Let me show you some of it. NBC News says this. They say, if I don't get immunity, this is Trump writing this, if I don't get immunity, because remember right now that there's a legal case arguing, the Supreme Court's taking it up, whether Donald, the former president of the United States, has presidential immunity or had presidential immunity at the crimes he's being accused of. And of course, historically, presidents had very broad immunity. They can even pardon people for some of the most severe crimes you can imagine. Look, Barack Obama was pardoning people who were found guilty of being involved with the Weather Underground and terrorist movements that killed police officers and bombed the Capitol building. That was Obama. And of course, if you can punish somebody for such a severe crime, you themselves have immunity. That's the difference on this. And Trump is suggesting that, well, look, say immunity, say it, but if he doesn't, it's not just him who loses presidential immunity. Joe Biden loses it, Barack Obama loses it, George Bush Jr. loses it, and anybody else who runs for president loses it as well. They could all be held criminally responsible for anything that people deem to be a crime they committed through the acts of, again, directing the country as president of the United States. And the NBC notes that Trump, after saying that if he doesn't get immunity, that crooked Joe Biden doesn't get immunity. And they say that Trump wrote this before criticizing the Biden administration for the record number of migrants crossing the U.S. southern border, illegal aliens, they mean. They're saying its 2021 decision to pull troops from Afghanistan, which of course led to the deaths of many U.S. troops and of course many U.S. supporters, and listening to claims of Biden engaging in shady business practices with foreign countries. And NBC News is suggesting that those accusations are all baseless. I would say that there's a lot of evidence to that. I don't know how baseless they are. But of course, it's tied in with Hunter Biden. The question is whether Biden was actually financially engaged with that. We're still seeing where that's going to go. And Trump continues by saying Joe would be ripe for indictment by weaponizing the DOJ, the Department of Justice, against his political opponent, me, Donald J. Trump. Joe has opened a giant Pandora's box. And Trump continues by stating, as president, I was protecting our country and doing a great job of doing so. Around the mess Joe Biden's, the least I am entitled to is presidential immunity. And take that as the way that this is being spun to the media.
And he didn't have the Presidential Records Act, and I do. What I did, nothing wrong. What he did, a lot of people say substantially wrong. You can't have two tiers of justice in this country. But no, I want to go to all of my trials.
Trump also addressed the issue of presidential immunity coming up in other cases, saying if a U.S. president doesn't have immunity, he'll be totally ineffective and unable to do anything.
Because it will mean he'll be prosecuted, strongly prosecuted perhaps, as soon as he leaves office by the opposing party. So a president of the United States, I'm not talking just me, I'm talking any president has to have immunity.
Engoron has already found Trump and his co-defendants liable for fraud. Trump's two sons, Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr., are among the defendants. Engoron says he hopes to have a verdict by the end of the month. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
At the losing a lot of their support and a lot of their audience. And that is an infodemic, according to them, because of that. I would say that this is a failing narrative, but the suggestion is that maybe we just need more censorship to save democracy. I would argue this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what democracy is. The fourth estate, the media, right, the journalists, was framed before as the representative of the people. You know, they're the individuals who go and collect information and hold politicians to account. I would say that, of course, many of the things we were told were fake in 2016, 2017, 2018, all the way, frankly, up until now. a lot of the things we were told were fake narratives and unsubstantiated claims have turned out to have been true. And a lot of, like, for example, the effectiveness of the vaccines, the possible lab origin of COVID-19. You know, the list goes on and on and on. The realities of Jeffrey Epstein and the crazy things he was doing with sex trafficking and possibly even having blackmail operations being run through him, which is, of course, generally understood now. We also were fed a lot of fake news that we were told was unquestionable reality. The rumors of Hunter Biden's laptop being Russian disinformation, that was a lie. The rumors that Donald J. Trump worked with Russia to rig our elections, that was a lie. The list could go on and on and on. And they're suggesting that if you dare question the establishment narratives, that you are guilty of threatening democracy itself. And I'd say the opposite is probably true in many of these cases. The lies of a lot of these outlets have been exposed, and the fact that they've been manipulating information for political reasons is being exposed. They're losing their audiences because people have lost trust in them, not because people are being, misled by unsubstantiated rumors and just don't know where to look for information. People go to what they believe is true based on, credibility of sources. And frankly, a lot of the establishment has lost its credibility because they keep lying to people. Look, The Guardian is suggesting that actions to prevent voter fraud themselves are threats to democracy. Imagine that. That, of course, they're saying that, this could be the year where we see elections under threat. Democracy is being threatened. And, of course, people might even try to rig elections. Remember, we saw that? They're suggesting that the nature of, rigging elections is not actually technically rigging elections, but instead people who believe that elections have been rigged taking actions to pass laws that will increase the security of the elections. And that if you want to increase the security of elections, that is an act of rigging an election. I'm not even joking. This is one of the main narratives going around. They're saying that, again, The Guardian saying that since increased security for the elections appears to be based on the idea that the 2020 election was rigged, anything like counting ballots by hand and similar acts of election integrity, maybe like voter ID, that this may just be an act of election interference in itself. The Guardian said, anti-democracy playbook has new threats in store for the U.S. in 2024. And that Guardian piece just goes over all the claims from Republicans that the elections in 2020 were rigged and how Republicans are facing legal attacks because of those claims. Of course, you have a lot of them getting sued or, facing racketeering charges in Georgia, which is kind of falling apart right now because Fani Willis is being accused of possibly having an affair with one of the main people Biden was meeting with to begin that whole thing, including the meetings that took place the very day that he appointed Jack Smith as special counsel to investigate his political enemy, Donald J. Trump. That's another story for another day. We'll get into it. But again, The Guardian is suggesting, right, it frames these suggestions that, the elections may have been rigged, that these are threats to democracy for the very act of suggesting that elections could be rigged, and that these individuals are criminals for facing criminal charges, and that if they get elected, then calls for similar criminal investigations on the other side are themselves also threats to democracy. In other words, if they dare do to the other side what the other side has done to them, they are threats to democracy, whereas the other side, by doing the things they're accusing conservatives of doing, are actually trying to defend democracy by legally targeting all their political opponents. Are you getting the way this logic is working? This is a broad narrative. According to PBS, Americans themselves, all of us, all just seem to agree that democracy is on the line. And, they do state pretty accurately, in my opinion. I would kind of agree with PBS on this. Each side accuses the other of this. They're saying that basically, Democrats are accusing Republicans of, believing democracy is under threat. And, of course, Republicans are saying that Democrats are representing a threat to democracy. each side accuses the other of the same thing. And of course, I'd say, well, we can just look at the facts and judge based on that. Everyone, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free.
Off the 2024 ballot, now he's facing charges.
Castro was charged with aiding the preparation of false tax returns. The Department of Justice says Castro generated false deductions for his customers while running a virtual tax business.
In 2018, Castro allegedly filed fraudulent deductions for an undercover DOJ agent. Castro now criticizes the timing of his arrest and the charges years after the undercover agent's involvement.
Castro started suing Trump a few months ago. He says the government going after him now is intentional targeting and political retaliation. And in Georgia, a judge is granting one of Trump's co-defendants a 3-month delay in his proceedings. That's in the Fulton County election interference case.
The defendant in question is Georgia State Senator Sean Still. Still now has until mid-April to file any pretrial motions. The deadline for all other filings stays in place.
Former President Trump